In the last section, we created our web service, we created our models. Now, in this section, we'll be looking at that how we can set up the Redux side. This means that we need a store, we need a global state, we need middlewares. So all of those different things we need to implement in this section to get it to work correctly. So we're going to start with creating our state. If you go to the store.swift file, you will see that we have our base state, which are the parent state or the global state, which is indicated by app state. This is the same thing that we have done when we were learning about creating the Redux state and the app state very earlier on. But we still don't really have any state to save movies. So let's go ahead and create the state and a reducer associated with the state. So I'm going to go ahead and start with creating a struct, and I will call it movie state. This will be using the protocol, which is a Redux state, which becomes kind of like the base protocol for all of the states we will ever use. And the reason that we are using the Redux state protocol is that in the reducer, you can see we are making sure that you can pass in a state, but that state must be of type or conforming to Redux state. And the same thing also goes for the actual middleware. We are passing in the generic type of state, but that stored state must be belonging to a protocol which is Redux state. So what exactly are we trying to save in the state for the movies? Well, we're trying to save movies. So let's go ahead and create a movies, which can be saving an array of movies. This is a model that we created earlier on. And this is it. This will be our state. We also need to update the app state, which will contain our movie state. So var movies equals to movie state. The app state is acting as a parent, as a global state, which contains other slices of the state, and one of those slices is movie state. Okay, so that's great. We got that working. Now let's go ahead and move to the reducer. If you look at the reducer, you will see that right now we only have one reducer, which is the app reducer. Even in the app reducer, it doesn't really do anything. It simply takes in the state and it assigns it to a new variable and then returns it. So it's not really doing much. Whatever state that you pass in, it simply returns that state. So what we want to do is we want to create a movies reducer state. And the reason that we want to create movie reducer state so that it can update the movies. So let's go ahead and add a new file. And you can call this file anything you want. I'm just going to go ahead and call this movies reducer. And let's go ahead and create the reducer function. So function movies reducer. A reducer is going to take in a state, which will be of type movie state. That's the slice of the state that we're working against. And an action, which would be an action, which is also a protocol, and it will return you the updated movie state. Now, once again, right now, we are simply going to implement or assign a new variable state and going to return the state. You can see that this particular movies reducer is not really doing much. It's taking the state and returning the same state back. Now let's go ahead and move to the app reducer and make sure that we are using or updating the movies state. So state, which is the global state, dot movies, which is the movie state, and we will get the updated movie state from when you're using the movies reducer. State dot movies, and in the action, we're just going to pass in the action. There we go. Great. So we have created a couple of different things in this lecture. We have ended up creating the movie state. We updated the app state so that now it knows about that small slice of the state called movies. we created the movies reducer, which doesn't really do much. It doesn't really update the state in any way. And we also updated our app reducer so that it is keeping track of all the different reducer. So app reducer is working over here as kind of like the root reducer, which contained other reducers. Now, a couple of things that we still need over here is that we need some way to fetch the data. And we are going to use the web service that we implemented earlier on to fetch the data. But the question is, where are we going to call that web service? If you remember correctly, we're going to be calling the web service inside a middleware. But right now, we don't have any middleware to begin with. We have created kind of like a definition of the middleware, which will look like this. But you can see that in our actual app, we are not even injecting the middleware into the store. So our next task will be to build a middleware, to build an action, to fetch the data using the web service, and then put it in the global state. So let's go ahead and get started with creating a middleware. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with creating our reducers and creating our actions. The first thing I need to do is I need to create an action, which is going to indicate that I will be fetching the movies. You can see that we already have the action protocol. I can go ahead and create an action, and I can call it fetch movies, which is going to conform to the action protocol. Actually, all the actions are going to be conforming to the action protocol. And in the fetch movies, we are fetching the movies using some sort of a keyword like Batman or Spider-Man, some sort of a word, a search criteria. So I'm going to go ahead and create a field called search, which will be of type string. This means that if you want to perform a fetch movies, you should pass in a search criteria, which in this case can be the name of the movie. Using this, now we can go and create our middleware. So inside the store, I'm going to go ahead and add a new group, and I will call it middlewares. And inside the middleware, I can add my middleware for the movies. So a new file. And we're going to add, and I will call it movies middleware. Correct. Now, we have already used the middleware before, and you know that middleware is just a function. So I'm going to go ahead and create a function, and I will call it movies middleware. It's not really going to take anything, but it is going to return you the middleware type with the app state. There we go. Now we can go ahead and return it. So something that can return a state, an action, and a dispatch. So we are returning a closure. And inside over here, we can perform a switch on the action. If the action is a fetch movies action, then this means that we need to fetch the movies. So let's go ahead and fetch the movies using the web service. Web service.getMoviesBy, passing in the action, which is fetchMovies.search, and we will get some sort of a completion handler back. Another thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that our search will also work on movies that contain wordings, meaning spacing, which is Lord space of space the space rings. So all of those movies that contain spacing. So I'm going to use the search, and I'm just going to call URL encode. URL encode is an extension on the string, so you can actually check out the extension. And what it is going to do is it's simply going to add the percentage encoding for the string on which we're calling. Okay, so the web service is going to return something. It is going to be a result. And now we can switch on the result. A result will be of type Swift type result which consists of a success and a failure. So if it is a success, we will get all the movies. And when we get all the movies, we can, well, do something about it. If let movies equals to movies. And over here, we need to set the movies to the state. But how do we do this? How do we set the movies to the state? The other thing that we need to take into account is the failure option. So let's go ahead and also implement failure. We will get the network error. And for failure, we're not really going to do much. We're simply going to print out the failure. So error.localize description. Okay, so now we need to find out, and it is saying that switch must be exhaustive. So right now we only have actually one action. So let's go ahead and see that what it is complaining about. The default, right? So we forgot the default, and the default will be simply to break it out. There we go. Let's go ahead and build it. Okay, so we unwrap the movies, but we don't really have any place to put the movies. Now for this, we are going to dispatch another action. So which action are we talking about? Well, we are going to build that action. So let's go ahead and jump into our store. The fetch movies action takes in the search and performs an action and, well, brings you back all the movies. But to set the movies, we're going to use a completely different action, which will be set movies action. The set movies action will be responsible for going all the way to the reducer, where the reducer can actually update the movies in the global state. Set movies is going to take in a list of movies. So let's go ahead and do that. Perfect. And now we can actually call set movies. So let's go to the middleware. And right over here, I can dispatch an action, dispatch, and I can say set movies and passing in the movies, which we already have now. Great. So this part is done and our middleware is actually created. One other thing that we definitely need to do is we need to set some configuration in the info.plist file. So we need to tell in info.plist file about the transport security settings. This is going to allow us to make the call using the web service, and it's going to allow us to perform a network call. So I'm going to jump into this info.plist file. I'm going to add a new key, which will be of type NS transport security. There we go. And make sure that the arbitrary loads is set to yes. There are some other ways to set it up, but the quickest one is to simply allow arbitrary loads to yes. You can also allow that which websites are whitelisted, meaning your app can actually trigger or your app can actually call those particular endpoints. But for now, we're just going to set it to allow arbitrary loads to yes, meaning that we can go ahead and call the websites with HTTPS, and it will allow us to perform network calls. Let's go ahead and build this. And this is our middleware, which is going to fetch all the movies depending on the action. And it is going to get all the movies and then call set movies. Although our middleware has been created, we haven't really set up the middleware, meaning your store has no idea that there is something called a middleware. You can see that when you're creating the store, if you want, you can pass in the middleware. And if you do pass in your middleware, eventually it will get executed. But if we go ahead and jump into the app file, you can see that we're not passing any middleware. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and say middlewares, and in an array, I'm just going to go ahead and pass the movies middleware. Now, this is an array. This means you can pass other middlewares if you want to, and that will work out perfectly fine. And in each middleware, you can also make sure that they act on a particular action. Okay, so this is our middleware. Now we need to implement the reducer, whose job will be to update the global state. So in the next lecture, we're going to dive into the reducer and we're going to write the code so that we can update the global state for the movies. Now, before we jump on to the next video, I do want to talk about AUM Sharp School, which is one of the largest catalogs for iOS development. I mean, check out these courses. If you simply click on the courses, you'll get a list of 22 plus courses. All of these courses are extremely intricately created for you. They all have hands-on exercises. I mean, look at these courses over here. Test-driven development. You have server-driven UI, Swift Data Bootcamp, MV design pattern, full stack iOS development, reactive programming, and much more. Now, you can pay the individual price, as you can see, $69, $89, or what most people end up doing, they just become a pro member. They get access to everything, all 22 plus courses, 130 hours of content, and more. So the best route for you is to just become a pro and get access to everything. All right, so that's it. Check out aumsharp.school, and I'm sure you're going to love it. Now let's go back to the video. So let's go ahead and get started with implementing our movies reducer. Currently, you can see the movies reducer simply takes in the state, which is of movie state, assigns it to a new variable, and returns it. It doesn't really do anything with it. So let's go ahead and do something with it. We're going to perform a switch on the action. Now, this is the action that the movies reducer can receive from a dispatch, or it can receive it from the middleware, because remember, the middleware is now capable of dispatching an action. Now, the action that we are trying to dispatch from the middleware is called set movies. So this is the action that in the reducer it's going to handle. So let's go to the movies reducer and check for that particular action. So case let action as set movies. If we get an action which is set movies, then we simply go take the global state dot movies. Well, in this case, it's movie state dot movies, and we simply set it to whatever the payload that we are sending, which is movies. We will also add for default, and for default, we're simply going to break it out. And then in the end, we're simply returning the actual state. And that is pretty much it. When you are using a movies reducer, when you're capturing a particular action, which in this case is set movies, and then you are updating the movie state, that particular slice of state, from whatever that the movies reducer or the middleware is passing to you. If we go back over here to the movies middleware, you can see that when we are calling the set movies, we are passing in the movies as an additional payload. And now we can access that using action.movies. So this is it. I mean, for the reducer, it's not much of a hard job. The reducer simply takes in the state and the action, it updates the state, and then it returns you a brand new state. The reason that we are calling this a brand new state is that we didn't really modify the original state. We assigned it to a new state variable. And that is making sure that we always have a brand new state and we're not updating the state. Okay, so this is great. Now in the next section, we'll be learning more about how we can display all the movies onto the view.